Okay, so I think I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Like I said, there are several who RSVP'd. I don't know how many people are going to show up, so I might pause from time to time. So I want to introduce myself. My name is Christine Bautista. I'm the career counselor for education and public and human services. Also lead for the SJSU Square, which is the online mentoring platform. So I'm here to talk about, how you might explore for grad school. So I see Jimmy had a question here. I posted it. Oh, actually, let me put it in here. Sorry, I posted it in the waiting room, but let me post it here. Hopefully you can get it now. I'm just reposting it again, and I'm seeing folks coming in. So let's see. Let's admit them in. You're welcome, Jimmy. Thanks for asking about that. I forgot I had it posted in the waiting room while folks came in early and made sure that they got to sign in. So for those who just joined us, please make sure to check in. I posted the link, and I might post it again throughout the session in case I miss folks if they come in late. So we will continue on. So before we get into the nitty-gritty stuff, I wanted to check in. And if you can let me know, so there's a reason here of why someone might go into grad school. And if you could type it in the chat, if you think if it's a good or a bad reason to get into grad school. So the statement is, I'm thinking of going to graduate school because I can't find a job. So do you think it's a good reason or a bad reason to get into grad school? So if you could type in your answer in the chat. Let me check what people think. Okay, so I see a lot of folks say it's a bad reason. And again, for those who just joined us, I'm just gonna put in the check-in form today. Yes, so let's see what the answer is. So yes, it is a bad reason, right? Like if you think about it, you're investing your time and money, right? So you wanna be more thoughtful about your reasons of why you want to get into grad school. So here's another statement of someone who might be, looking into grad school. So I'm considering attending graduate school because I'm interested in a career that requires a graduate degree. So do you think it's a good reason or a bad reason? And again, just type in your answer in the chat box. Let's see what people think. So people think it's a good reason. Okay. See. Yes, so it is a good reason, right? So like I mentioned earlier, you're investing your time and money. And so, when you think about grad school, you're specializing on something, right? So if you're going to specialize on particular area of study, it is helpful if you're considering it because it's something that would help, further your career or something that's required in the career that you are going for. So is grad school right for you? I think that's the first question you want to ask yourself. I think it helps to reflect, upon your reasons of why you're looking into grad school. So first you want to ask yourself, like, what are your career objectives, right? Like, what or how do you think grad school will help you with your career goals? Do you even need a graduate degree? Because there's some occupations that don't necessarily require a higher degree, right? So if you don't necessarily need a graduate school, you might not need to invest in it, right? So you want to also ask, like, will a graduate degree increase your earning potential or job opportunities? So if in your research you find that is the case, then it might make sense to get into grad school. And again, depending on what type of program you might get into, you could be spending, 2 to 7 years of your life in grad school. Right? So you want to be thinking, are you excited about, this subject matter to study enough, for more years, right, of your life, committing yourself to it. So you want to be asking yourself that. It's also helpful to ask yourself, like, have you researched graduate schools to find one that is a good fit for you? Because there are a lot of schools that offer, similar programs, similar master's degree or higher degrees. But they all do it a little bit different based on, their mission or vision as an institution. So you want to be asking yourself, those questions. And then, are you financially prepared, right? I mean, for me, it's a personal value. Like, I don't have tens and thousands of dollars lying around. I don't have a rich uncle who can help me. So if I were to go back again and pursue grad school, I want to be thinking about, am I really able to afford this, right? Like, does it make financial sense for me to pursue graduate school? And I'm not a financial advisor, so I can't advise to that. But there is a cost to going to grad school. So I would recommend if the institution has some support in helping you figure out how you might pay for tuition, or if you have your own person that you consult with, it helps to think about if you're financially prepared. And then, have you given yourself enough time to apply? I think this is important. You can't, there's some programs where you can't just immediately go into grad school after your undergrad, because there are some higher degree programs where they actually in their eligibility requirements indicate that they need someone who has relevant experience or a certain number of years of experience. And so if you're a fresh undergrad graduate, right, you might not have that yet. So maybe your next step is not necessarily to apply for grad school, but maybe build the relevant experience needed to get into it. And then, so that leads to the next question, right? Do you need work experience first? So I've noticed there were new folks coming in. So if you could just, I'm going to type in the chat the check-in form. So if you could just check in and hold on for. Okay. So the next thing, aside from asking yourself these questions, is really to get to know yourself, right? It is helpful to do, some self-assessment. So these are the areas that you might be looking into, right? So you want to know who you are, like your personality. You want to know your interests, like what gets you engaged, what gets you excited. You want to look into your skills, what are you good at? And your values, what are important to you? And if you combine all of these things, you get a sense of purpose, right? Basically figuring out like who you are and what can you do to contribute to the world, right? Sort of like that. And so you might want to look into doing some self-assessment, and we do have a major and career exploration guide. And towards the end of the session, I'll show you where you might find this resource, but I'll just walk you through quickly, on the guide, right? So in your situation, if you're still like, I know I want to get into further studies, but I'm not really sure like what programs to consider, it might help to do some self-assessment. So this is what the guide looks like. And if you, click on career exploration, this is something that might be helpful for you. So there are several assessments here. The skills inventory and the career values assessment are self-explanatory, but Focus 2 is a tool that is accessible to you, using your single sign-on. So I'm just going to show you quickly what Focus 2 looks like. So this is what it looks like. This is the landing page. You could use any of the assessment. So in terms of finding the tool, let me just show you now, since someone asked like, where is the link? If you go to the Career Center, if you click on resources, you'll actually see all of our printable stuff. And here under Explore Your Options is the major and career exploration guide. So let me just copy the link right now and drop it in the chat. Okay. And then what you want to do then, where did we go? Okay, so here you're welcome. Here's what it looks like, right? So at minimum, I would recommend doing the work interest assessment. And when we say assessment, it's not a test, so there are no right or wrong answers. It's really about figuring out what your preferences are. And so I'm just going to focus on the work interest assessment for today. So again, it's not, a test. It's really just, there's a statement. It'll ask you like, how much you agree with the statement, if it's true for yourself. And then after that, you basically, after you do it, you land on this page with the results, and you have this three letter code. And this 3-letter code basically, what do you call this, gives you an idea, is based on Holland's career theory. So Holland is a career theorist. He believes we have interest in 6 different areas, but out of the 6, we have our top 3. So for the way this profile was answered, that the 3-letter code came up as SAI. And so it explains what the letters actually mean. And what you might find helpful is actually this page. So if you click on continue, and it's thinking right now. Is you land on this page where basically there are several columns. So the first one is a column which has a list of possible occupations. So there's so many occupations in the world, right? Like I don't know all of the titles, and it's possible that you may not know these as well. So it's important, you know, like to do this because you can get some ideas of possible occupations to explore, and then make a determination like if grad school does make sense, right? So the first column are examples of occupations where, you know, people like yourself who have a similar code tend to gravitate toward. And then the second column are like possible majors or programs to look into specific to San Jose State, but maybe if you want to consider these types of programs in other institutions, it's also possible. But if you click on a particular occupation, it'll actually like give you like more specific information about the occupation, and you can get a better sense like, oh, is it really required, right? Like is a higher degree required, or what type of degree is required? So for this one, let's say if you're interested in becoming a professor, like, oh, a master's degree is enough. I don't need to do a PhD, you know? So it depends again on the occupation. And if you go back to the guide, there's actually, so this is the page that I was showing you. There's this other page where you could, you know, use the grid, fill in information, because sometimes when we hear an occupation title, it sounds sexy, but then when you look at the day-to-day task, it's not something that you find particularly enjoyable, right? So it's helpful to dig a little bit deeper, you know, and learn more about possible occupations, and then also figure out like, you know, if I'm attracted to this type of occupation, is grad school necessary, right? So going back, so again, you know, start with yourself, get to know your preferences, you know, do self-assessment, so you can get a better sense of what your purpose is, right? Once you've determined, you know, I think grad school really is the route for me, you know, I've looked into the occupation, grad school is necessary, then you want to be thinking about, you know, researching graduate schools, right? So these are some things to look into. So you want to look into the curriculum and class offerings. You want to look at faculty specializations, especially if you're going into grad school for research. You want to find faculty that, you know, are doing research in things that you're interested in, right? You also want to determine the class format that fits for you. You know, do you want to do it online, in person, or hybrid? You also want to look at program costs, right? You know, how much will tuition be? What are other costs attached to completing this program? Are there, you know, financial aid or support? And then you also want to look into average completion time and rate. So there are schools where they run by quarter system. There are schools that run by semester system. So that might impact, you know, time and completion rate. And if it's important to you to look at ranking, you know, this is just another item to look into. And then you also want to look into campus resources for their students, right? So for me, if again, this is my personal value, like if I was to go to graduate school and invest more money and time, I would like to know that, you know, my employability will increase, right? So I might be interested to learn about, you know, the career center services, or if internship is required in the program, like are there built-in supports within the curriculum, you know, that will help me achieve success in this area. And then how do you get this information? You look at websites, you attend information sessions. A lot of grad schools host those events. Right now, I'm thinking it's mostly virtual, so it's pretty convenient. Or you can also just reach out to an alumni or faculty and actually do an informational session or interview with them. Any questions so far? You can type it in the chat or unmute yourself. And I don't know if there were new people who came in who haven't checked in. I'm just going to put it again in the, oh, actually, I just realized I put in the link to the guide. So let me copy the link to the check-in form. Hold on, let me just do that right now. But any questions so far? Do folks have any questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Sure.
So are there any info sessions for San Jose State specifically, like that are coming up?
So you would need to look into the specific program, because I would assume each department or program handles their information session different. I am not aware of like a central location where you would know where to find these information sessions, but I have seen them being announced in departmental websites, right? So depending on your program of interest, I would look into the website and see if there are upcoming information sessions, or go to the department website, ask like who their contact person is, or there's usually like an email, right? Like for questions, we email this particular person, and then maybe ask them if there's nothing posted on the website, maybe ask when they might be hosting a future information session. And that's a good question. Okay, so now we're going to look at some of the grad school application requirements. So you might not be required to provide all of these, but we're just going to spend a little time on these, because these are some of the things that might be required of you. And I just wanted to look at them a little bit more closely and just explain what those are. So CV versus resume, they're similar but different. So a CV is more of a detailed record of your education, employment history, research experience, certifications, publications, professional affiliations, and a lot more information may potentially be included. It's usually 2 or more pages long. A resume is different. It's more concise, highlights education, experience, skills, projects, and accomplishments, and is customized. And it's usually just a page or 2. So when you're looking at application requirements, you really want to determine which they're asking of you, right? So there's a note here, typically CV is used to apply for research programs, PhD programs, careers in academia or medical school. So you want to pay attention closely to what is being asked of you. So these are possible sections on a CV and a resume. I don't know if you can see it. There are some that are bolded and italicized. Those are the ones that you primarily see in a CV rather. The other ones are, well, you could see both in resume and, potentially in resume and CV. And you don't need to have all, I mean, because, unless you're superhuman, you probably don't have experience in all of these things. But whatever that you have, you want to highlight it on your CV or resume. So just briefly on the resume format, you want to have your contact information on top. You want to have an objective if it's necessary. You want to include your education. So highlight your degree, not the university, because you're promoting yourself. Also include class projects, right? And relevant coursework. So if you've taken some classes, because there are some graduate programs, for example, that maybe they don't require you to have a degree, an undergraduate degree in that field of study, but maybe in their eligibility requirements, they indicate, must have taken XYZ class, right? And so if that's the case, you could add a relevant coursework section. And then projects are any school projects where you've, looked into the field of study, learned about it, or, just highlighting some of your interest areas. And this is just a continuation of a resume. So you want to include experience. It can be paid or unpaid, and start with the most recent experience. And if it's unpaid, just add the word volunteer. You could also include, some of the skills. And when we talk about skills, these are observable skills, things that can be verified. So if you say you're fluent in Vietnamese, if I ask someone to make that assessment and talk to you in Vietnamese, you should be able to speak in Vietnamese, right? In addition to skills, some people put certifications, right? So let's say you're getting into field where, certain certifications are required, you could add that, section. So you might call it skills and certifications. And then you could have like, under us, one of the subcategories in this area, certification. So for example, like if you're going into counseling, maybe mentioning that you have mental health first aid certification is helpful. If you're, going into more engineering routes, maybe there's a certification that you've done online that you would want to mention. And then you could also add activities. Okay, so this is just highlighted. So in the bullet points of your resume or CV, you always want to be thinking about your accomplishment statements. So I think for both, you don't just want to list, tasks and duties. You want to be thinking about, what was your contribution in that role or in that project, right? So each statement ideally should answer, what did you do? How did you do it? And what were the results? So I'm just briefly touching upon, resume and CV. So we do have other resources on this if you're interested. And it could, we have a resume and cover letter guide if you want to learn more about this. And then just briefly, this is an example of what I was saying earlier of just like listing down tasks, right? So this is a weak example, writing down that you made a check-in system, greeted customers, presented at staff meetings, and contacted clients remotely. And then to make it stronger, you want to answer the 3 questions, right? Like, what did you do? How did you do it? And what were the results? So for example, in the first statement, instead of just saying you made a check-in system, you might say develop new check-in system to process clients more efficiently, ensuring approximately 200 clients per week receive services, right? So it creates a clearer picture of your accomplishment in that role. So the next requirement that you may, or, I more or less you'll probably get is a personal statement or a statement of purpose, and they are different. So the personal statement is a broader statement that allows the committee to get to know you by learning about your past. So it's really about, who you are, what is it about you that got drawn to this field or interest area, right? So you want to share your personal background and life experience. You want to illuminate your personal challenges and goals and explains reasons why you want to pursue graduate studies. Excuse me, I just have to excuse myself for a little bit. Hold on. Thank you, sorry about that. And then on the other hand, statement of purpose is concise statements that allows the committee to get to know you about, learning about your future. Basically, they want to know that you're a suitable candidate for the program. They want to know your career goals, right? So it's more future driven, future focused. So we're going to look at it a little bit more closely, right? So for a personal statement, this might be an example prompt that you might encounter. So what personal and professional experiences have you had that led you to consider this program? So you want to think about your personal background, think about a hook or a theme, and relate it to why you chose to apply for grad school. You also want to be thinking about your academic background and experience, and think about what you did that might have further solidified your interest in a particular study, right? So for example, I'm just gonna think of psychology because I did counseling as my program. So if you were going to apply for a counseling program, for example, you might be thinking about, what got you interested in counseling in the first place? So you might share a quick story about, growing up, you had this friend who, went through a difficult, family situation, and this friend sought, counseling services, or you could even share a little bit about your own personal experience. But you don't want to be focusing too much on the story. You just want to focus on like how that experience got you interested in that area, right? And then let's just say, oh, let's just focus on that. Like maybe, within your family, there was a family member who, had some mental health issues, and, your family sought mental health services and you found it really helpful. It helped your family, communicate better or whatnot. And that got you interested in becoming a counselor yourself. And then so you could talk about like, I pursued my undergrad in psychology, and in that program, I participated in a research with my professor. I'm just making this up, but let's say that's the case, right? Like you worked with a professor in their research lab, and that solidified your interest in pursuing counseling. And in particular, you want to help family members cope with loved ones who are dealing with mental illness. So that would be like an example of how you might answer that. So just some additional tips. You want to show something unique about yourself. You want to answer the questions completely. You want to make sure it's relevant, right? Like review the prompts. Make sure you're addressing the points that they're asking, and pick an overarching theme or a story. I'm sure you've had like several experiences in life. You don't need to tell all of the things that you've experienced that sort of solidified for you your interest in a subject area. You just maybe need to focus on like maybe anywhere from 1 to 3 key experiences that really tell a story. And remember what is appropriate in personal statements, right? So like I said, in the example I gave earlier, you're sharing a little bit about yourself, but you're not fully disclosing, the nitty-gritty of your life or what your family member went through, right? I mean, you can share a little bit. I mean, if you want, I'm just making this example. Let's say if you're applying for a counseling program, maybe you want to share a little bit about the diagnosis if you feel comfortable, but that's not even required, right? Like you can just paint a picture of how seeking services from a mental health professional made you interested in that area. And then don't exceed the word limit and follow the prompt, because there are some that specifically say, must be answered in 500 words or less. So just make sure you follow the instructions. On the other hand, for a statement of purpose, this might be a sample question that you might encounter. So what is your career goal and how will getting into this program help you there? So you want to explain like why you want to get into graduate school, like why would it be helpful for you? What are your academic and career objectives? And why is this particular school a good fit for you in terms of your academic and career objectives? So let's say, again, I'm just going to use the counseling scenario because that's my background. So if I were to answer a statement of purpose, I would explain like, why do I want to go to graduate school, right? So I could say like, I've always been inspired to be a mental health professional. I understand that you have to be licensed, to become a clinical therapist. And so, I see that, this, explain like, what is it about this institution that appeals to you, right? So explain that you looked into their program, you've spoken with some of their professors and see that they highly value diversity, right? And that's something that speaks to you. And then explain, that your, long-term goal is, I want to be a mental health provider in a nonprofit organization serving, underrepresented communities, right? So that gives a picture of why you think this particular school is a good fit for you. So, and just some tips: be clear and specific in your goals, use active language, show and not tell, right? Like give specific experiences of what again drew you and how you actually imagine using the things that you will learn in this program, to help you in your career in the future. Address or know your audience, know that, I don't know, I mean, some might disclose like who's going to be reading your, your application. So if you're able to check that out, determine that. Customized to each school, because there might be, several programs that are looking into, that might be offering the degree you're looking for, but they all have different emphasis. They are all driven by their own institution's mission and values and vision. So you want to look into that. Note any referrals. So if you have been encouraged by one of the faculty, or like, someone who is in the program who was, encouraging you to apply, you could mention that. And then don't exceed, again, the word limit, and follow the prompt. So any questions at this point? I know there's a lot of information that I'm throwing in. Just want to check in. We're at the half hour. And then for those who have just joined us at some point, please fill out the check-in form here. Any questions?
Yes, just to clarify, so graduate programs will either require a resume. I'm assuming, is a CV a cover letter? Is that what that is?
No, CV is curriculum vitae. So the CV is a detailed list of everything that you've done, right? It looks a little bit like a resume, but it's more comprehensive, I guess. Like it includes, so let me, it includes more information.
Okay, CV. So the so graduate programs will either require resume versus CV, or just both, sometimes both, something like that, right?
Yeah. So you want to look at like what they're specifically asking for, because each will be different.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, so in terms of requesting letters of recommendations, I guess I've yet to see a program that does not require this. I think at minimum, what I usually see as being required is the CV or resume, your personal statement or statement of purpose, and your letters of recommendations. I think those would be like the minimum requirements. In terms of letters of recommendations, basically they serve as testimonial for your work experience. They're trying to figure out like what your motivation is and your potential. And you might be required to submit anywhere from 2 or 4 letters. So who do you ask, right, to help you? So you want to get help from your professors, employers, advisors, or mentors. Basically choose individuals who are able to provide an evaluation or feedback about your academic or work performance, right, and ability to succeed. And some institutions might actually specify like where these recommendations should be coming from, right? So in terms of requesting letters of recommendations, here are just some tips. Select a date you would like all letters to be completed. Contact the people at least 1 to 2 months prior to your deadline. You want to also give them enough lead time to prepare your letter of recommendation. So even if you didn't do any work with your professor, you've taken a class with them, right? Like, so if I'm assuming by work, you mean like lab, but you've taken a class with the professor. And if you have built a relationship with the professor, I would recommend, reaching out to them. Doesn't necessarily mean you've done research with them. And which is why I would recommend take advantage of your professor's office hours, get to know them, build a relationship with them, because they can support you, right? Like in these types of endeavors. So that's what I would recommend. So yeah, you want to give lead time in terms of asking for letters of recommendations. Include a copy of your resume or CV and personal statement or statement of purpose, and list of your career goals when submitting a request. And this is particularly helpful, like even for those students who have had a good relationship with their professors. If it's a professor that maybe you've taken a class with, 1 or 2 years ago, they've cycled through so many students right from that point, right? And so it's helpful to sort of jog their memory, remind them, who you are, and why you're asking for help. And it's helpful to share these documents so they can reference it when they're writing a letter for you. Provide clear instructions on how to submit the letter of recommendation, and provide stamped and addressed envelope as needed. So you want to look at the institution's instructions, right? So you could also coach the person who's going to recommend you, the specific instructions. Send a reminder to the person 1 to 2 weeks from the selected date if you haven't heard back. And write a thank you or letter or email to all the individuals who completed a recommendation for you. So it's really important, right, that you acknowledge, that it's something, it's an extra help that they're doing for you. So you want to acknowledge and thank them for their time. So just some today's takeaways, and then I will show you, I want to point out some resources on our website before I fully close the session. You you want to know yourself, right? Conduct self-assessment, reflect if graduate school is for you. Again, you know, it's time and money invested. And with grad school, the idea is you're specializing in something. So you want to know if it's a good fit for you. Research graduate schools and see how it fits with your career objectives. So in the presentation earlier, we talked about, you know, looking into curriculum, looking at faculty specializations, looking at how, you know, the class format will be. So you want to look into those things. Review admissions requirement and prepare application documents targeted to the institution or program of interest. So it's really important to learn about, you know, the particular program, learn about their mission and vision, you know, and think about, you know, to yourself, like, why would you want to apply for this program versus at another institution that might be offering the same thing, right? So there must be something about that program, that institution that is exciting to you. And now I'm going to point some resources and actually show you where to find them. So earlier in the session, you know, I showed you where to find the major exploration guide and how you might do some self-assessment. I'll also show you where to find the resume and cover letter guide. We also have a guide on applying to graduate school, which basically sums up what we talked about today. And then you can also consult with your career counselor, right? So when you're at that point where, you know, I'm ready, I want to put my documents together, you know, talk to the counselor that is, I guess, matches the field of your interest, because they might be able to give you some ideas. So let me start with the Career Center website. So if you go to the Career Center website, if you hover over resources, you'll see all of the apps available to you 24/7. But if you click on resources, you'll see printable stuff. So I'll start with develop your career plan. There is this pathways document where you could basically find the counselor that you can consult with, right? So let's say you're in business and you're thinking of getting into an MBA program, you might want to talk to Larissa. Or let's say you're a psychology major, but you actually want to get into MBA. So you would still want to talk to Larissa, so and so on and so forth. So that's how you would use this resource. So I'm gonna drop it in the chat so you guys have it as well. And then going back to here, so explore your options. There is the major and career exploration guide. So I walked you through this earlier in the session, so I'm just going to copy and put it in the chat box. Again, and you want to do the career exploration activity just to do some self-assessment and reflection. And let's see here. And then if you need help with your resume or your CV, we have a resume and cover letter guide here for you that you could use. So let me drop it in the chat as well, so you have that resource. So I don't know why it got stuck that way. So here, there's a page here, you know, CV versus resume. There's worksheets here on how to write accomplishment statements, so you could use this as you see fit. And then finally here, there's a section on applying to graduate school. So let me copy this and put it in the chat. So everything we talked about is here and possibly more, right? So there's here some reasons of why you want to get into grad school and reflecting, you know, if it's the right or, you know, the best reasons, I guess. And then here are just explaining the types of degrees. We didn't get into this earlier, but, you know, you have this resource to look at just to learn more about that. And then there's this page on research in grad school. So we talked about these areas that you might look into. And there's also this website that I want to share with you, Peterson. So if you're like, I really have no clue what program or school, this is a pretty good resource to use. So, you know, you could just type in grad, and I'll just put counseling right now because I've used that example throughout today. And then here you'll see, you know, programs, and you could even, you know, use these filters depending on how you want to, you know, do your search. So that link is within here in the guide. And then here, just a review of the general application requirements that you might usually see in grad school. And, you know, there's just all of this explanation and example of a CV. And then an example of a resume just to see the difference. And again, this is what we talked about, the difference between the personal statement and the statement of purpose. There's a page here on letters of recommendation. And admission tests, we didn't really talk about that today because it will really depend on the program you're getting into. I know some institutions have waived some of these admission tests due to COVID for right now. I don't know what will happen in the near future, but you want to look into those types of requirements. And some programs actually require an interview as part of their process. And so you also want to prepare for that, right? So there's a resource here on preparing for graduate schools interview, but that's not for all programs. I don't see that a lot, to be honest. I'm guessing that this is probably used for more competitive programs as an added layer, to filter through, because, especially with graduate school, you're specializing on something, right? And there's a lot of people who are, wanting to get into graduate schools, and it might be competitive. And sometimes there's an added layer of screening candidates, right? Just to find the best candidate for the program. So I think someone joined us just now. We're almost at the end. This event will be recorded, and it should be on the Career Center YouTube channel at some point. But let me just stop share a little bit and let me know if you have any questions at this point. I do want to repost again the attendance form just in case you missed it. So let me just copy that information and drop it in the chat. And I would appreciate it if you could complete that for me. For those that came in a little later. Any questions so far? And it could be about graduate school or like career counseling in general. And for right now, I'm also dropping the feedback form for today's presentation. So if you could also complete that, that would be highly appreciated. Any questions so far? Or maybe there's something that I went through quickly that you want me to revisit. You have about 15 minutes, so I want to make sure that I answer your questions. Okay, so if there aren't any more questions, I think we can call it a day. I will type my email in the chat box. So if you have any questions, I'll type it again. You're welcome to reach out to me. And if you haven't already, again, please complete the survey that I just posted in the chat box. And thank you so much for coming today and spending the lunch hour with me.